My name is David Turner. For quite a big part of my life, I've been a war resister, a peace campaigner, uh, perhaps focusing for kind of middle years in the campaign for nuclear disarmament. And that will be a thread that runs right through life from very early on. About the 1990s, you may remember the ending of the Cold War as such in '89, and there was great talk of called the peace dividend. The arms race was effectively over, so what could we look for in a changed kind of world scene? And of course, it didn't happen. There was a brief lull, and then by the middle of 1990s, it was business as usual, and the arms manufacture was continuing to rise again. I had been aware of this group called the Campaign Against the Arms Trade because it goes back to about 75, but either didn't have the time or didn't feel particularly at that time it was necessarily my thing. But it began to come to me very forcibly that here was something I should take an interest in. And in due course, I felt that I wanted to be more than interested, but active in continuing to learn, but also, taking some part in helping other people to understand some of the issues. So I joined the campaign against the arms trade at that time. And when the opportunity came to start a little group in Edinburgh, kind of at the middle of the 1990s, I took part in that. A wee bit about Imogen, who's sharing this with me today.
I'm Imogen. I'm the current development worker for Edinburgh Campaign Against the Arms Trade. I've been active on peace and environmental issues since about 2006, when I used to live in the south of England, mostly anti-nuclear stuff because we had the atomic weapons establishment at Aldermaston very nearby where I lived. And sort of carried on with that through moving up to Scotland. Involved with Campaign Against the Arms Trade.
I'm going to kind of retreat from the campaigning focus today because we're here and we're really glad to take part in something which is about learning and sharing. And we're not here for a hard sell. If people want to know something about the campaign at a later point, that's absolutely fine, but there's no pressures to take it any further than this discussion itself, which will be an important thing, is to just get moving on it. In order to do that, we want to present a number of things that were called facts. I think most of them are verifiable, so it's not a question of I've invented them for today's meeting. And then, questions that might arise from these facts. I'm very conscious of the fact that nobody knows all the facts about any subject, that we're selective. We select something which is meaningful to us, which we can contain within our limited heads, and we take it from there for what kind of interpretations we might want to make of them. So I'm very open to facts that other people have, which perhaps might seem to be in opposition, or you have to be placed alongside my facts in order to look at a wider picture. I feel very open to being challenged on anything that you feel arises from your understandings of the facts. So on that basis, I think we'll probably go ahead. One of the things which I felt interesting maybe to do was to talk a bit about the global picture and to start off with that. From the United Nations, we have some figures which suggest that the total military spending at the present is about $7 billion a week, but it's rising. And of that, possibly 20 to 25% is in the buying and selling side of it. The others are simply what countries produce or manufacture in order to meet their own national needs, whatever they may be. But there's another UN report which sets a kind of interesting comparison with that, and it says that the global provision of food, water, education, sanitation, housing for all who are in serious want would be around that same figure. So it's just a kind of comparison of how we actually choose to use the resources of the world today. That kind of contrast sometimes makes us feel a bit numb. And that means that the height of these figures, and I think that's very natural, and particularly if we're thinking, about even saying, how would we ever tackle this head on? It's totally, totally beyond us. I think what we can at least think about, though, is what might be contributing to it, and which we might be able to change given the political will which may be needed for that. And to acknowledge that many people are actually trying to address some of the contributory factors, a whole range of organisations bringing their understandings to this question, which we are on about today. And the issues are really, bound up with so many others that we have to say that these things are independent. We can't wholly isolate one from the other. But what we're trying to do today, though, this is what we're about today, is what part the arms trade plays, and see if we can tease that out a bit. I would say, first of all, it was not about national defence, not because that's not an important issue. In fact, some of us have strong views about that and the extent to which we're involved in that. But I want to distinguish that because it's a different argument. What we're talking about today is the arms trade, the buying and selling of weapons worldwide. And if we're going to have an informed discussion about anything, we need to be able to trust certain things, such as the evidence which has been put before us. And that includes the buyers and the sellers, the items that are being traded, for what purpose, what regulations and controls exist, how the business is justified, and what might be driving it that isn't publicly acknowledged. It's an enormous area of study, so we're only really looking at the outlines of it today so that we can begin to shape our understanding of it and perhaps look at it from a range of points of view. So we'll have question and discussion, but that can be easily interspersed with simply bringing something up that you want clarified at the time, rather than saying we'll hold all that till the end and then probably forgotten it by that time. I'm very, very happy to be interrupted. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you and see whether anybody else here knows the answer. So a little bit about who are the big players on the arms front. Big ones are the 5 members of the Security Council, the USA, UK, Russia, France and China. And they have got 75% of the world market. There are 2 coming up quite fast among the smaller players, Germany and Israel, who are both increasing their share. But it's still, we're talking about 3/4 of it all is the Security Council people, who technically are there to keep the peace of the world. And they sell, well, the UK is somewhere around 2nd or 3rd place. It varies a little bit from time to time. We're certainly high up in the league of the 5. And we sell to about 60 countries worldwide, and some of these are democratic, some are authoritarian in various degrees. What do we sell? Well, warships, fighter aircraft, submarines, helicopters, missiles and missile delivery systems, drones, which are now, drones are these unmanned aircraft, which we've been hearing more about. Used to be for surveillance, now carry bombs, and somebody in Nevada presses a button and the bomb drops in Afghanistan.
Can I interrupt and ask a question, as you invited? Sure. Where are these weapons made?
Where the weapons are made, ones I'm talking about are made in UK. We're talking about UK manufacturing.
Okay, UK manufacturing.
In this particular case.
Okay.
We do all that stuff.
I just wondered if the argument that it's creating jobs could be used, and obviously can be used.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Then tanks included in that. That's the big stuff. And that's no use for anything except wars or whatever. But then there's the armoured vehicles, things like machine guns, rifles, ammunition, security equipment, such as tear gas and battering rams, oddly enough, razor wire, and riot gear. And these are not much use in war, but they're ideal when a country wants to cut down on the protests with its own people. They can be used for that. Who are the big players here, the big buyers rather? Oil-rich states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Republics are among those who really buy big items for very often that these are part of what you might call the UK or NATO military bases in the Far East and South Pacific. And it's these very big things that help to keep the UK trade afloat. So our arms promoting teams of government ministers and arms trade representatives, diplomatic personnel visit them frequently. Very recently to India and recently to South Arabia. But they're roaming around now some of the countries like Egypt and others which are changing their regimes and which are in fact to be a possible new market, looking for markets. Africa has always been a valued market and has for a long time was about 60% of UK trade at one time. I think it's diminished a bit. China is moving in there very rapidly. Only South Africa, of Africa, buys really heavy stuff. And one of them is submarines. And sometimes it can be quite strange. What does South Africa need to be defended against? It needs submarines. There you are. It's as well to remember that South Africa is a very, very poor country with lots and lots of people in terrible circumstances. But they choose to get submarines. So others in Africa buys mainly small arms, which include quite a number of these things, but it couldn't anything up to the level of armoured vehicles. And it's these that cause the most casualties among civilians. And they very easily cross national boundaries. And they often found the arms from what we call the respectable selling countries bound up in the hands of militias and even child soldiers. Now that's just a very brief outline of how the trade operates from this country, but there's more of interest. There are one or two bits around here that would perhaps add to that if you want. So what controls and regulation is there in this country? There's always been some. I don't know just what form it took way back in the kind of middle 20th century, but certainly since about the 80s onwards, there's been an attempt to try and formulate controls that would be reasonably robust. But there was a period, and particularly when the Labour Party came to power, 1997, to look again at these rules. And I think it was Robert Cook who devised what you call the ethical foreign policy. And in terms of that, the controls on export of arms were tightened up. Then there was a question of how can we align these with other countries in Europe, because we're continually knowing that we're very much part of Europe. And it turned out eventually that our arms controls were fairly consistent with European ones, what's called a European common policy on arms transfers. We run more or less with that. We have a licensing committee which is made up of a selection of MPs from the major parties, and the composition changes from time to time. But I would imagine that perhaps there are certain members of Parliament who would not be invited onto the licensing committee. But that's speculation rather than fact. The criteria for arms sales, there are 9 of them. I'm not going to deal with them all, but mainly with 3 of them, which are perhaps the most important and the one that most of all come up. I'll just spend a minute or two on that because I think it's quite important. I'll just mention what the 3 of them are. Criterion 2, the respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the country of destination. Would not issue an export license if there's a clear risk that the proposed export might be used for internal repression. And the second one was, the government will not issue a license for export which provoke or prolong armed conflicts or aggravate existing tensions or conflicts in the country of final destination. And the third major one, the compatibility of the arms exports with the technical and economic capacity of the recipient country, taking into account the desirability that states should achieve the legitimate needs of security and defence with the least diversion for armaments of human and armaments of human and economic resources. So that comes up into the major things which so often I think are what we judge our arms exports on. I think we've got to look at really what the reality is of that. On internal repression, which is one of the major things, the government's own Human Rights Select Committee, which is a kind of watchdog body, names 26 countries which are of serious concern on human rights. This is over the last decade. In that period, the UK sold to 16 of these, which included Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, Bahrain, Yemen, Syria, South Arabia, Israel, Sri Lanka, and Colombia. The defence of that against people who have criticised it is that the kind of arms that we actually exported to these countries are not the type which could be used for internal repression. Whether that or not is true in some cases, it's been shown to be quite untrue in others. And Libya is a good example, where up until 2010, we were supplying them with arms of all kinds, security equipment of some of the kinds we've been mentioning, and also we were training their army. The other defence is that, well, yes, we all make mistakes, misjudgments are made, lessons are learned, but still to now, Bahrain, South Arabia, Southern Arabia, and Israel are still getting arms from Britain. On areas of conflict, that was another part. There's a body called the Stockholm Peace Research Institute, and it has named 16 states which are in areas of major armed conflict. The UK sold to 12 of these, including both sides in certain places, like India, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Eritrea. And the third one is the economic impact could it be justified in the light of these countries' economic situation. And Eisenhower, very interestingly enough, you've been mentioning him, one of the things he said after he had left his official post was that every warship launched, every helicopter made, every bullet fired is a theft from the poor and the hungry and the homeless. Not exactly a pacifist. He was looking at it from a point of view of the realities of life. That's what it means. It goes on one, it can't go on the other. So maybe that goes back to my first words about the contrast between global world spending and what actually people need rather than arms. And so in an interdependent world economy, which has got finite resources, is the buying and the selling of arms a profit and loss or loss in terms of simply human well-being? And you've been answering that yourself, I think. But it's an important yardstick, human well-being rather than profit and loss.
Human loss.
The third one, and perhaps one that was perhaps is again most pushed for, is that we need the arms trade because it's part of our national security. It's never very clear what part the arms trade plays in our national security. We could say, well, okay, we build stuff for our defence, and fair enough. So, what are the threats to our security today? What do people feel are the threats to Britain? Where do they come from?
Britain and the Western world themselves that are creating all these wars and killing all these people. And that's going to rebound on us. Obviously, it's going to fuel people's anger and hatred towards us. Simple as that.
But it would be relatively straightforward for malevolent external agency to commit an atrocity on a colossal scale, like shutting a dirty bomb into the Staines reservoirs. That was a minor atomic explosion, steam, radioactivity, London drenched with radioactivity, people soaking it, people drinking tap water is not fit to drink, dying of radiation poisoning because the water supply is contaminated. Now, Staines Reservoirs Field supplies London. And now, I've written stories about just that happening. A small suitcase-sized atom bomb lobbed into, not an atom bomb as such, not a Hiroshima bomb, but one that causes the radioactive stuff to burn, and the outcome is something like caustic soda that gets into people's lungs and burns chemically corrosive and radioactive as well in the water supply. And London is drenched from head to toe with radioactivity, and people are dying of radiation poisoning by the 100,000.
Can we see any way in which the arms trade would protect us from that?
I can't see how. They're actually encouraging it, aren't they?
Yes, it's often, people would normally say, well, maybe it's this terrorist threat, that's the thing that's most real, etc. But again, what can protect us from that, of the selling big stuff to places in the Far East?
In fact, I think it probably makes us more of a target, and the fact that we've got fast lane and everything. I mean, when I grew up, you were very, very scared of the Russians. Let's face it, on the button. I mean, I used to sell like peace news and things on the street, and people would spit on you, really spit on you.
That's because of the propaganda in the media.
And I mean, one of the things about the world, I think, is the fact that people are much greedier than they used to be. And if we can change that whole mentality, because plenty of people are quite happy for it all to still go on. So I mean, I think you're talking pie in the sky if you think anything will be done very fast, because I've been doing this since back in the 60s, and it just doesn't. But I don't think they help us at all defence-wise, quite frankly. I mean, how you pass lane there, it's one of the first things they'd hit, the Forth Bridge, places like that. You just have to hit Scotland in a couple of places and we're all gone. And I mean, the arms trade does not protect us from that.
If an atom bomb went off by accident at Bath Lane, the obvious outcome would be radioactive rain drenching the central belt. Born on those westerly winds, assuming that there was not atomic explosion per se, but really explosion of high explosive, the stuff that makes an atom bomb go off is like caustic soda. It's on the powder when you heat it, like caustic soda and another substance in the school lab. But it's all brought from the atmosphere. That's why they had to set down to Western to be dehydrated. Now this stuff becomes fine dust that gets into people's lungs, and it is not only corrosive and radioactive. Plutonium hydroxide, exactly like the properties of the caustic soda and similar substances. Plutonium is a chemical of the same family as sodium and potassium. And this radioactive rain would simply bucket down right across the populated part of Scotland, around Aberdeen and on across to the continent.
I was saying the Scottish population would be very easy.
I would say something like 3 million people would die of radioactive dust poisoning, radiation poisoning. Remember that famous film On the Beach, 1964, nuclear war, and everybody died of radioactive poisoning, including people in Australia. I was a boy at the time, and I had nightmares. And my religious knowledge teacher told us all about atom bombs. That's how I became a C&D supporter. It's good old Canon Norwood.
Well, I think it sounds as if a kind of consensus here that national security is not a terribly good argument for the arms trade. Just maybe my kind of last section is on, how in fact the arms trade, what may be driving forces apart from these? Are there some that I think we feel don't stand up? What might be some of the real driving forces for it? Just say one or two things that come off the cuff from government people, not when they don't think anybody else is particularly listening too much. But some of them lately have been that the arms trade is a part of the projection of UK power and influence on the world stage. So the trade seen as a political agenda of kind of prestige and status for the UK in the world. More arms, more global clout.
I think that's what I was
the
talking about, the
exception-
way of thinking, because it's that way of thinking, that has to be changed, which is very difficult.
Very different.
Yeah, because I mean, that's what all the big nations face, isn't it? It's all about power, prestige, what other countries think.
But it really helps to know what we're really up against here, because that's something then we have got to find ways of countering, rather than trying to persuade people that it's not the national security or something or jobs. We've got to say about other underlying motivations.
It's basically the biggest money-making business in the world, isn't it?
Oh, well, of course, it's the money making for those who benefit, shareholders and armed companies would be about name. There's the exceptional closeness of the government and armed companies. I don't know if you remember, but there used to be a bit of a joke when Tony Blair was in power that the BAE chief executive always had a key to the back door of number 10. And somebody else said, oh, no, that's not true. He doesn't even need that because Tony's at the door waving him in the front door. Well, take that as you like. But I think really there's a little truth behind it, that this exceptional closeness of the arms trade right at the heart of government is a very, very unhealthy thing, which we really have got to take into account. Should any one industry have a unique influence, and particularly an arms industry, which is not producing something that benefits humanity compared with the vast amount of activity manufacturing that does benefit it, and 140 civil servants are involved in promoting the arms trade. 140. 128 are involved in all other non-military sectors combined. That's all else reviewed. And yet, let's say the arms industry is 1.5 of total manufacturing.
The thing about aircraft, I don't know if old people remember them. Britain built the Comet, the world's first successful jet airline. And actually, the Nimrod plane went with a modified Comet. And Britain built a VC-10 and other airliners. I saw them in action at air shows when I was a young man. Now, Britain stopped building airliners. There had been attempts to design better airliners than Boeing's, and there had been in the new scientists, engineers had proposed that Britain should build airliners as good as the ones made in America. But did the government back the VC-10, a number of aeroplanes I saw in action as a young man, which were just one-off prototypes? No, it did not. Had Britain built airliners, continued to build airliners, we could have outdone the Americans, or for example, the Airbus company.
These are choices that have been made at some point.
The same factories that produced fighter planes could have built flying wing airliners to a British patent design that would carry 500 people. And I mean, as a boy, I saw them flying. I saw an aircraft on the cliffs of Southampton, a half-scale model of a vertical takeoff airliner called a Rotodyne. And I got stuck with it. When I was a young man, I went to Southampton. It was given to the Boy Scouts because nobody wanted it anymore. It was on the coast in central Southampton. Now, this plane could have gone up and off to Paris and got there in an hour flight. And the government didn't back it. And there were other inventions that we had, were shown at invention fairs in London, which I saw, including electric bicycles, that across London protected drug use. And Britain didn't back them. Medical inventions, including one that used condoms, believe it or not, which were invented by a technician at the London hospital. We could have manufactured to give the world, but the government didn't back them.
Yes, that's right. These are political choices that were made. And again, I think probably influenced by the tremendous power that arms companies have always had, and which doesn't seem to have diminished. Just the final point on that was that was something you might call the revolving door of senior political people and military people and arms company people, who move swiftly from job to job. When they lose, or at least when they leave one job for one reason or another, they move quickly into another career in one of these other. But this makes up a very solidly entrenched establishment, which is so, so hard to challenge. And I think there's that kind of power in the total military establishment, which has been behind the choices made over a long period of 50 years about what we really should invest in.
Is this not really dealing with the secret society that control them?
Well, it's secret up to a point. It's been exposed.
The secret
There was
society that have the
a
control.
study done a little while ago there, which indicated that over the last 5 years, 60 major figures in these three sectors, but all to do with defence, have moved from job to job. So that's so hard. It's a very entrenched thing. These people are also of the same class, same education background, same social circles. They move all the time in a tight circle, and that's unique. There is no other industry that's got that kind of entrenched thing there. Which, why would any of them ever question the status quo? Well, we granted licenses to Malawi, Kenya, Angola, Indonesia. Indonesia has billions of debt from past arms loans and find it difficult to pay them. And these are also in conflict zones or were very recently. Certainly, they've got desperate problems of poverty. There's a letter from my MP, which in response to a question I asked, which I think is quite illuminating. She talks about the Committee on Arms Exports Controls. This is another body which oversees what we're selling. It published a report in April 2011, which called into question the government's record on the application of the criteria. The committee's report said, while the consolidated criteria appear robust, their application seems to be less so. We therefore recommend that the government ensures that UK UE common position is rigidly and consistently applied. The government's response to that, the government does not accept that there is any evidence that the UK application of the criteria is in any way less robust than the EU common position. There was recently a statement by an MP, some of you may have heard of him, it goes back a bit though now, Sir John Stanley, at one time a defence minister, I think in the 1980s, and a very staunch member of the establishment at the time. And he has said very recently that a policy of maximising arms exports, which was what our present government say they want to do, want to increase our share of them, policy of maximisation is incompatible with human rights. Well, so that's not just one of us saying it, he's one of them. Any questions on that, or comments on that before I just move on to the next bit, which is the justifications which are made for the trade?
I don't understand it at all because, they keep saying, we're going to cut back on the armed forces, yeah.
Cut back on?
Yeah.
Or cut back on what?
Armed forces.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And yet, they've still wanting recruits and that,
Mm-hmm. It would appear certainly that there's some reduction of money for defence, but there doesn't seem to be any reduction in the subsidies given to companies who are selling arms. I haven't heard anywhere if there is any reduction.
Let's say that there are restrictions on the terms that arms can be sold under. If these terms are violated, it seems from our information. So why do they get away with it? Who's supposed to be overseeing that process?
Well, that's a very good question.
Like
these watchdog bodies are supposed to oversee it. The trouble is that they come in after the event. That's one thing my MP has said to me. If I had been around when that was happening, I would have complained. But I could have equally said to her, yes, you could have complained, but it would have already happened by that time. There's no way in which anybody can challenge the licensing committee's decisions at this stage.
But can't they be punished? You know, if they have violated the rules, can they not then be fined an enormous sum or some other sort of?
There doesn't seem to be any process at
So
all.
they get away with it.
They could more or less. They could be. I say these advisory watchdog bodies could wrap their knuckles and say you need to watch it. You know, obviously, you know you're either on the very borderline of things or else you're going right over them. But then what they would then say is, we take your point, and you know, but then it continues and so on.
It brings to mind the old expression, who guards the guards? It's, something I'm wondering is, I'm thinking of Eisenhower's address when he stepped down as a military leader, and how do we refocus the military industrial complex towards something that's proactive. I mean, one proud moment in life was I remember there was a tremendous earthquake, and the only people who could respond to this huge disaster was the military, and they went in and did a really great job. I imagine that's one of the best night's sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, how repurposable is the technology? If we're thinking on about dealing with relatively unphilosophical minds, undeveloped minds, let's sell bombs because we make money. Maybe we've got to take a social constructivist approach and go, well, you could make even more money by doing, using this technology in this way. Yeah.
It comes to mind the prefabricated houses built in aircraft factories with aircraft technology. Handley Page of the Halifax bomber, etc. The same machinery. Now, when I lived in Stafford, there were still a few of these prefabs left. They were only tended for about 10 years, but that was, how many, 50 years? Nigh on, 40 years. Now, by extension, I knew also another interesting thing. An armaments factory in London called Woolwich Arsenal built steam locomotives. I wonder if it's still running on private railways. To keep the workmen busy, the factory carried on making steam locomotives, the design of a South Eastern Railway, and think of several other similar examples of German firms, Krupp, the armaments firm, of course, made steam engines, ad nauseam. Thousands of them. So why shouldn't firms build those Australian-made caissons that intercept the waves that would cause coastal erosion in East Anglia? It was all the new scientists. A whole chain of caissons along the low-lying coasts of Britain to protect the counties like Norfolk ending up in Davy Jones's locker. So this is far more urgent than any foreign foe is rising sea. Montrose will end up in Davy Jones's locker. You know where it is, on his no sand spit. Therefore, I have written a social science fiction novel about quite far in the future of a line of caissons right round from Berwick-on-Tweed, right round to Devon. And generating all the electricity Britain needs by the waves and wind turbines attached to them, so that Britain needs no combustion apart from small preserved railways. And if you haddock smokeries, smoked haddock places in Arbroath, apart from that, no combustion whatsoever. Everything and the low-lying places. I mean, think of half of east of Norfolk. About 1 man height, that would be Davy Jones's locker. Can anybody comment on those observations?
Well, I think that's the only way we can go forward is to divert the technology into good uses, because you can't stop the argument that just withdraw the whole industry is not going to work. But if a good argument can be put up and demonstrated that that technology can be diverted into good uses, then it seems to me that that is the way we have to go forward. It's the only way, really. I mean, it's the old thing, ploughshares in, what is it?
Yeah.
You know,
So-
yeah. I mean, that has to be done, it seems to me. I mean, anybody who's been campaigning against the evils of the world comes to a point where you feel you're overwhelmed by it. You're overwhelmed by it. But I think we're at the point in history now where we have to realise that we can't be overwhelmed, and we must find new solutions. And it's not just a matter of stop; it's a matter of divert and see that there is a future in a different way that is more compatible to the well-being of all of us. And the point we're at now in history with the internet and globalization and everything is we are beginning to realize that all our destinies are shared and united. So
Yeah,
there
it's
is,
a-
you know, I think if people's minds just have that little shift, and if we all contribute towards persuading or enlightening people in our own different ways. I'm a writer, same as you. I write in magazines and everything. Yes, I've been standing back now and sort of, I was quite for years, and I was sort of, it's not too much for me. But we have to think of new ways to combat these evils. And I think diversion of technology.
Well, you're stealing my language, you know.
It's not only people, ordinary people start uniting, everyone will start uniting. That's the only way it's ever going to happen.
Absolutely.
The only way.
I am David Seagrave, social science fiction writer, not science fiction. And there's the Martians, there are Scots on Mars, and they're Presbyterians to the last man and woman. In a story of mine called Never Let Your Standards Left, which is about a man from our killing goes to Mars, to the Martian killing, to broadcast to the children of Mars about Elizabeth II society, our society, film clips of dissoluteness in Glasgow and Edinburgh, warning this is horrible. You know, people being assaulted, football rioters, the expenses scandal, all that, as future, looking back upon it from 2 centuries ahead. I've written about a Russian guy called Roman Rykov, who sent to Scotland by courtesy of the King of Scotland, and he goes to film of Scotland's renewable power achievement, that is namely the Caisons offshore, the wave power stations, the wind power stations, the tidal barrages across the Clyde, and advanced his classmates in Moscow. See, that's what I mean. Now that's mapping the future. And Lady, would you agree with that? I'll provide copies.
Well, I think it's lovely to project forward into the future, because sometimes it sounds as if it might be better than what's now. So whatever. Anyway, thank you for that.
I feel as if we're putting a lot more money into, the vehicles in Afghanistan and that with the IEDs. So we're making the structure, blast-proof underneath. I feel as if they're putting a lot of money on that, but at the end of the day, they're saving the soldiers' lives, But, I mean, the IEDs are killers, really,
So,
You don't get much.
maybe they just, it's a thankless task for them.
But
isn't it?
these are things that are being swapped around in the arms trade. They're sold, they're bought and sold.
Yeah.
The Americans are bent on world domination now. That's exactly what they're planning for. I've listened to, I don't know if anybody watches RT today.
A good friend of mine keeps recommending
You have
it.
to watch
Yeah.
listen to talk. Americans
Yeah.
yeah. The Americans are planning to go to war with China in 20 years' time. I'm not sure, but most will go with China. Yeah, that's where they've got a partner, got 250,000 people on all the different air bases throughout the world. And they're increasing them. They're getting very worried now. They're thinking even coming out of the arms agreements, and if the arms agreements are the same with America, then I think we're even just forgetting about that.
And
They don't trust America anymore.
They've also got like NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical warfare missiles as well, all over the world, which is a bit scary,
I'd like to really move on with some more of the points that you've.
Well, fair
Yeah.
enough, yes. I think probably inevitably that people here would be ahead of me. I'm glad to hear that. Just maybe a word about what some of the justifications are. And these are the things which are probably not any news to you. But very often, one of the objections to, for instance, the kind of campaigns that we bring forward is that, yes, I know, but let's think about the jobs involved. And some of you have been, what you've been saying is relevant to that. But just to put it in perspective, the arms-related jobs are just 0.2% of UK workforce. And 1.5% of all UK manufacturing, that's the volume of it, and it's shrinking. Less than half the number are employed in the arms trade firms than in the 1990s. So it's going down. Just recently, the BAE Systems made redundant 3,000 people in England. And it's a rather unpleasant reflection that supposing a major arms company like BAE Systems decide to relocate, as they are doing a bit anyway, more than half of their business is now in America. If they decide to relocate, it would absolutely devastate the communities of Fife and Edinburgh who depend on arms, the arms trade. It would be catastrophic. So, that reinforces what we've been saying about the need to look at alternatives. And that renewable energy companies are among those who are crying out for any one of these common skills that they have with arms trade. There's about 30 commonly recognised skills that can be used for a wide range of other industries as well as the arms trade. A recent report suggests that 82,000 engineers, technicians and scientists are needed by civil industries, which are emerging now, and that would include some of what you've been talking about. So that's the job side. These are government defences often. So you find as we're out on the streets talking to people, very often more the jobs. But I say putting it in perspective is important, and far more serious structural changes have been handled in Britain over the last 30 years. Coal, engineering.
Exactly, get rid of all that without any bother.
The other one is economic benefit, and it's another one that really needs to be questioned. First of all, how do we measure it? If we measure it simply in kind of balance sheet terms of profit and loss, the government has never come up with any figures which really show that, on that measure, we gain from the arms trade. If they have such figures, they have not released them. Very reputed economists are very much divided about the question of whether there's any economic benefit. Bearing in mind the fact that we give about $750 million in subsidies to the arms trade every year. So there's so many, you might call it, things you can't define about benefit, because it depends which you want to use in order to bolster your case, one way or the other.
Basically, it is that we taxpayers are handing money, hand over fist, to armed factories, firms, who are not even producing these things in Britain. But I hear that the armed forces have received inferior uniforms and other equipment from overseas. Army boots made in Portugal are disintegrating after a week in Afghanistan, and whilst a factory producing things like that was shut down. Sort of story where they go straight into the hands of officers of the armed forces who have shareholdings in armament firms and spending money on wine. So that's what that's all about.
Well, maybe you could spend it worse, I don't know. But is there one with a wider context for economic